A fist swung hard at a woman's head. She slipped it. The knuckle sailed past her ear and cracked into a wooden post behind her. The young man behind that fist stumbled off balance, surprised his punch had hit nothing but air. He set his feet and swung again. This time her palm met his wrist, turned it, and folded him toward the mat. He caught himself. His friends laughed, but the laugh died fast. Something was wrong. The lady he'd come to embarrass was not moving like a lady who mopped floors. Her name was Diane Corliss, and for 30 years the Navy had a different word for what she could do with her hands. Her son had no idea. He was about to find out in front of everyone he wanted to impress. What Diane did next left the whole dojo silent. Stay with me on this one. The dojo sat at the end of a gravel road outside Corliss, a low building with a metal roof that ticked in the afternoon heat. Diane opened it every morning at 5. She swept the lot. She wiped down the mats. She refilled the water cooler and checked the tape on the heavy bags. By the time the first students arrived, the woman who ran the place was already on her knees with a rag. That was how most people saw her, the lady with the rag. 58 years old, gray coming into her hair, a stiffness in her left knee on cold mornings. Parents dropped their kids off and barely nodded at her. New students called her ma'am and then forgot she was there. She liked it that way. Believe me, she had spent a long career being seen, and quiet suited her now. She wasn't alone in that building. There was a dog, an old Belgian Malinois named Ranger, a lean brown animal with a gray muzzle and one torn ear. He lay by the front door most of the day, chin on his paws, watching everyone who came in and out. He didn't beg, he didn't bark, he just watched the way a dog watches when it used to have a job. Kids wanted to pet him. Diane let them, but she kept an eye on it. That dog had a switch in him, and only she knew where it was. You could learn a lot about Diane by watching her teach. She never raised her voice. When a scared 6-year-old wouldn't let go of the wall, she didn't drag him onto the mat. She sat down next to him and waited until he came out on his own. When 2 older boys started showing off, cranking each other's arms too hard, she was between them before either saw her move, and she didn't scold them. She put a hand flat on each chest and held them apart until the heat went out of the room. Parents thought she was soft. She wasn't soft. She was in control, and there's a difference, and most people never learn to tell the two apart. Now, here's the thing about Diane's son. Marcus was 19, built like a young bull, and he had just earned his black belt at a big competition school across town. Not her school. He'd made a point of that a few years back. He wanted a real dojo, he said. A place with trophies in the window and an instructor who'd fought on television. Diane had smiled and told him to go be great, and he did. He trained hard, he won his matches, and he came home with a belt he'd bled for. The problem was what the belt did to him. He started talking down to people. He'd correct strangers at the gym. He'd flex in mirrors. And more, he needled his mother. She ran a little dojo for kids and hobbyists, and to Marcus that meant she wasn't serious. He'd watch her teach 8-year-olds how to fall safely and shake his head like he was watching someone waste their life. "You ever actually fight anybody, Mom?" he asked her one night at dinner. "Like really fight?" She kept eating. "A few times." "When?" "Long time ago." "See, that's what I mean." He leaned back. "You always say that, long time ago. Nobody who's actually done something says it like that, they tell you about it." Diane set down her fork. She looked at her son for a long moment, and something crossed her face that he didn't recognize because he'd never seen it before. It wasn't hurt. It was patience. The kind of patience a person builds only by holding very still in very bad places. "Okay," she said, and went back to eating. She never talked about the Navy. Marcus knew she'd served. He knew she'd retired as a Master Chief, which sounded impressive but which he'd never bothered to understand. He pictured her behind a desk. His father had died when Marcus was 4, and his mother had raised him alone on a pension and a small business. And to a teenage boy, that story sounded like sacrifice, not danger. He loved her. He just didn't respect her, and there's a difference, and he was too young to know it cuts. What Marcus didn't know was the rest of it. That his mother had once built and commanded the first all-woman breach unit the Navy ever put into the field. A small hand-picked crew that went through doors other people prayed never to open. They cleared rooms. They pulled hostages out of places that had no good way in. They did it in the dark, in the water, in countries that would never appear in any story his mother told. 4 women who trusted each other with everything, led by a 5th who taught them how to move. He didn't know she had a box in the back of her closet she never opened in front of him. Not medals. She didn't care about medals. Letters. Letters from mothers and widows and grown men, dozens of them, thanking her for the son she carried out, the husband she brought home, the friend she wouldn't let quit. She kept those. Everything else she'd given away or thrown out. That box told you exactly who Diane Corliss was, and her own son had never once seen inside it. The dog had been part of that world too. Ranger was a combat dog, retired now, but a whistle from Diane still lit him up like a live wire. She almost never used it. She kept the whistle on a cord around her neck under her shirt, and most people figured it was a keepsake. It wasn't a keepsake. It was a command. So there she was, the lady with the rag, on an ordinary Saturday. Class had ended. The little kids had gone home. And Marcus walked in with 3 of his friends from the competition school, all of them loud, all of them full of themselves, and Diane knew before he said a word that today was the day he'd finally decided to prove his point in front of an audience. Marcus dropped his gym bag on the mat like he owned the place. "Mom, we were talking on the way over." He grinned at his friends. "These guys don't believe you ever really trained. I told them you'd spar me, just to show them." The friends laughed. One of them, a big kid named Tree, filmed it on his phone from the second Marcus started talking. That was the plan, Diane realized. They'd already decided how the video ended. Mom taps out. Everybody laughs. Marcus is the man. She looked at the 4 of them. She looked at the phone. And in the corner by the door, Ranger lifted his gray head off his paws. "You want to spar?" Diane said. It wasn't a question. "Light contact," Marcus said, already stretching, already sure. "I'll go easy. I don't want to actually hurt you." There it was. I don't want to actually hurt you. He meant it kindly, which was somehow worse. He'd measured his own mother and decided she was fragile, and he was going to be gentle with her in front of a camera so his friends could see how good he'd gotten. Diane felt something old stir in her chest. Not anger, just a quiet, tired recognition that this lesson had been coming for a long time and there was no way around it anymore. Only through. She stood up off her knees, and for the first time in a long time she stopped moving like the lady with the rag. "Put your mouthpiece in," she said, "and tell your friend to keep filming. You'll want to watch this later." The 4 of them thought that was hilarious. Marcus popped in his mouthpiece, rolled his neck, and bounced on his toes the way champions do on TV. Diane didn't bounce. She didn't stretch. She walked to the center of the mat in her socks, hands loose at her sides, and she waited. And that stillness, more than anything she could have said, was the first thing that made Tree stop laughing behind the phone. Marcus came in fast. That's where the hook picked up, and now you know how we got there. He swung for her head, sure she'd flinch. She slipped it clean, and his knuckles cracked into the post. He swung again, and she turned his wrist and folded him toward the floor. He caught himself off balance, breathing hard already, and the laughter in the room curdled into something quiet and confused. "Lucky," Marcus muttered. He reset. He came again, and this time he threw a real combination, the kind that had won him medals. Jab, cross, low kick, and here's the thing. His mother wasn't there for any of it. She wasn't fast the way young fighters are fast. She was early. She read the jab off his shoulder before it left. She was already inside the cross, and when the low kick came, she simply lifted her knee and let his shin bang into it like he'd kicked a fence post. He hopped back, wincing. "Stop playing around," he said, and now his voice had an edge because his friends were watching and nothing was working. "I'm not playing," Diane said. "You're just not used to someone who isn't scared of you." He rushed her. He was bigger, stronger, and he threw all of that weight into a takedown, wrapping her legs, driving forward the way he'd drilled 1,000 times. And for a second it looked like he had her. He drove her back 2 steps. The friends made noise. Tree pushed the phone closer. Then Diane did something none of them could follow. She dropped her weight, hooked his arm, turned her hips, and Marcus went from driving forward to flying sideways. He hit the mat flat on his back. All the air punched out of him in one loud gasp, and before he could understand what happened, his mother's forearm was resting light across his collarbone and her knee was pinning his hip and he could not move a single inch. She wasn't even breathing hard. The room went dead silent. "That's the silence the hook promised you." Marcus stared up at her, and for the first time in years he really looked at his mother's face, and what he saw there scared him more than the pin. No anger, no showing off, just a calm, professional focus, like she'd done this exact thing to grown men in the dark and it had been much more serious than a Saturday afternoon. She let him up. She stepped back and gave him space. And Marcus, embarrassed and rattled and 19, did the thing young men do when they've been beaten in front of their friends. He got angry. "You got lucky twice," he said, jabbing a finger at her. "That's some trick. That's not fighting. Fighting is—" He stopped, searching for the word, and landed on the cruelest one he had. "You're a janitor, Mom. You mop floors. Don't act like you're some kind of soldier." The friends went quiet. Even they knew that one landed wrong. Tree lowered the phone an inch. One of the others looked at his shoes. They'd come for a funny video, and somewhere in the last 2 minutes the fun had drained out of it, and now their friend was standing over his own mother saying something they could all feel was too far. And Diane, who had absorbed 30 years of blows without flinching, absorbed that one too. She didn't fire back. She just nodded slowly, like a woman filing something away, and she said, "Okay, that's enough for today." She turned and walked toward the water cooler. She picked up a paper cup. She filled it. She took a sip. She reached down and scratched Ranger behind his torn ear, and the old dog leaned into her hand. The tension bled out of the room. The friends started murmuring again, half laughing, telling Marcus he'd get her next time. Marcus grabbed his water bottle, still fuming, already spinning the story in his head into one where he'd won. It was over. Just a weird afternoon. Just Mom's little trick. That's what everyone thought. It was over. The door opened. No knock, no warning. Just the flat squeak of hinges and a rectangle of white light, and 3 women walked into the dojo like they'd walked into 100 rooms exactly like it. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to. The way they moved changed the whole air in the building. One held the door. One stepped left. One stepped right. They spread out without a word, covering the room, and every one of Marcus's friends felt it in their stomach before their brains caught up. These were not customers. Ranger came off the floor in one motion, ears up, tail rigid, and he made a sound low in his chest that none of the boys had ever heard from a dog before. Diane's hand dropped to his collar without her even looking. "Easy," she said. The dog held. The oldest of the 3, tall, silver-haired, a long white scar along her jaw, looked at Diane and then at the boy in the middle of the mat, and she said the words that changed the entire nature of that afternoon. "Master Chief, we were in the area." A pause, a thin, dangerous smile. "Heard somebody called you a janitor." And the bottom dropped out of Marcus's world. Because here's what those words meant, and Marcus understood it all in one sick rush. Master Chief. Not a nickname, a rank, And these women said it the way you say the name of someone you'd follow off a cliff. In the area. Nobody was ever just in the area at a dojo at the end of a gravel road. And heard somebody called you a janitor told him the ugliest thing of all. They already knew what he'd said. Which meant they'd been outside. Which meant they'd been watching. This wasn't three strangers wandering in. This was his mother's crew, and they had come, and Marcus had no idea what he'd stepped into or how deep it went. If you're still with me, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. This story is about to open all the way up, and you'll want to see how far it goes. The tall woman crossed the mat. She moved like Diane moved, that same unhurried economy, and she stopped in front of Marcus and looked him up and down like she was reading a file. "You're the son," she said. "You've got her jaw." Shame about the mouth. She turned to Diane. "He any good?" "He's got tools," Diane said. "Nobody ever taught him what they're for." "That was always your specialty." The woman put out her hand and Marcus shook it on reflex and her grip closed around his like a machine. "Name's Cortez, Chief Petty Officer, retired. I served under your mother 11 years. That woman you just called a janitor pulled me out of a burning building in a country I'm still not allowed to name. Carried me 400 meters with a bullet in her leg. You want to know how her knee got stiff? She let go. Now you do." Marcus looked at his mother's leg. He'd watched her rub that knee on cold mornings his whole life. He'd handed her the heating pad. He'd never once asked why. He just decided it was an old lady's bad knee. Now he couldn't stop thinking about it. The other two had drifted closer. One was short and wide-shouldered, forearms like cable, and she introduced herself only as Vega. The other was younger, quiet, with eyes that never stopped moving around the room, and she said nothing. Diane looked at that one the longest. "You brought Sook," Diane said softly. "She insisted," Cortez said. "When she heard we were coming, she wouldn't stay home." The quiet woman finally spoke. Her voice was low. "You went through the door for me first, Master Chief, in Basra. I was 17 years in and I froze on the threshold, and you didn't yell, you didn't shove. You just put your hand on my shoulder and went first." She looked at Marcus, and there was nothing cruel in her face, which made it worse. "Your mother has never in her life left anyone behind. Not one of us, and you told her she mops floors." Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The three friends he'd brought to impress had backed all the way to the wall, and Tree had lowered the phone completely, because some part of him understood that whatever this was, it was not content anymore. It was real, and it was too big for a phone. "Okay," Marcus finally managed. "So she was in the military. I didn't know it was like that, but you can't just walk in here and—" "We're not here for you," Vega cut in flat. "Sit down and be quiet. We came for her." And that was the second turn, the one Marcus never saw coming, because he'd thought this whole afternoon was about him. It had stopped being about him the second that door opened. Cortez turned back to Diane, and her hard face softened by a degree. "It's Ramos, Danny Ramos, his widow called me," she caught herself. "Almost his widow, that's the point. The VA denied his claim again. Third time, they're saying his condition wasn't service-connected." She paused. "He's not doing good, Diane. She thinks he's got a plan, a permanent one. We couldn't reach you by phone, so we drove." The change in Diane was total. The dojo, the sparring, her son's insult, all of it fell off her like a coat, and what stood there in its place was the person these three women had crossed a state to find. The Master Chief. "When?" she said. "His hearing's Monday, 9 a.m. in San Diego. He's got no advocate, no paperwork in order, and he's stopped answering his own phone." Cortez shook her head. "You're the only one he ever really listened to. If anybody can get him in that room and keep him alive through the weekend, it's you." "Where is he now?" "His truck's parked out by the reservoir, Since yesterday. Vega's got eyes on the location. He doesn't know we're coming." Marcus stood forgotten at the edge of the mat and watched his mother become someone he had never met. She started giving orders, quiet and fast. "Vega, get his file, all of it. Call the widow back and get the denial letter photographed and sent tonight. Cortez, you're on Danny. Do not let him be alone. Take shifts. Suk, your paperwork. You always were the best of us. We're rebuilding that claim from the studs by Sunday night." And every one of those hard, capable women said yes, Master Chief, and moved, because 30 years hadn't changed a thing about who they trusted. And in the middle of it, Diane turned to her son. "You wanted to see what I did," she said. "Come here, you're going to help." His friends were still against the wall. Marcus looked at them, then at his mother, and for the first time in a long time the belt around his waist didn't decide it for him. "Go home," he told them. "I'll call you." And they went, quick and quiet, and Tree stopped at the door and deleted the video without being asked. And then it was just Marcus and the 4 women and the dog. Now here's where the real lesson lived, and it wasn't the pin on the mat. They found Danny Ramos at the reservoir an hour before dark, sitting in a cold truck with the engine off, and Marcus watched his mother walk up to that truck alone, empty hands loose at her sides, the same way she'd stood on the mat. She didn't bang on the window. She opened the passenger door slow, said, "Move over, sailor, you're in my seat," and climbed in. And she sat with that man in the dark for 2 hours before he'd let anyone else near. Marcus never heard what she said. He just watched the shape of the 2 of them through the windshield. And after a while, Danny Ramos let go of whatever he'd been holding and let them take him home. Marcus spent that whole weekend in a small apartment across the bay watching his mother work, and it took the wind out of him more than any takedown could have. He watched her sit on the floor beside a shaking man twice his age with hollow eyes and a service record that would stop your heart. And he watched her not fix him, not lecture him, just stay. Hours. She held the man's hand while he cried. She got him to eat. She got him to sleep. And when Danny said the thing quiet broken men say at 2 in the morning, that the world would be lighter without him in it, Marcus watched his mother lean close and say, "Not on my watch, sailor. You didn't quit on me in the water, and I'm not quitting on you on dry land. We go through this door together." First light. That was the woman he'd called a janitor. They built the claim over 2 days. Suk laid the paperwork across the kitchen table like a mission map, and Diane knew every form, every deadline, every regulation, because she'd done this before, dozens of times, for men and women whose names Marcus would never know. She knew which box the second reviewer always missed. She knew which doctor's report the VA couldn't argue with. She'd been fighting this same slow war for 15 years in kitchens like this one, and nobody had ever handed her a medal for it. This was the rest of her retirement, the part she never mentioned at dinner. She didn't just mop mats. She spent her quiet days dragging her old crew and their families out of the worst rooms of their lives, one at a time, and she never told a soul, least of all her son, because it was never a story to her. It was a duty, and you don't brag about a duty, you just keep the door. Marcus carried boxes. He drove. He got coffee. He sat in the corner and finally shut his mouth and watched. And somewhere in the second night, he asked Suk, quiet, why they'd all come so far for one man. She looked at him a long time before she answered. "Because your mother came for every one of us once," she said. "You don't get to keep that. You have to pass it on. That's the whole point of it." And the belt around his waist started to feel very small. Monday morning, 9 a.m., they walked into the VA hearing together, all of them. Diane in a plain jacket, Danny Ramos in a pressed shirt Cortez had ironed, the widow, the 3 teammates, and Marcus. They filled the little room. The official behind the desk looked up at the wall of quiet, unbending people and understood he was not going to rush this one. Diane didn't raise her voice once. She laid the file down. She walked the man through the record, clean and precise, dates and diagnoses, and the connection the VA had missed 3 times. She did not plead. She did not perform. She simply made it impossible to look away from the truth, the same way she'd made it impossible for her son to land a punch. And when the official started to fall back on the same wording that had denied Danny twice before, Diane leaned forward and said, calm as still water, "I led the team that put this man in those buildings. I signed the orders. Whatever's broken in him, we broke it, our country broke it, doing exactly what we asked. You will not tell his wife it wasn't connected. Look at the file. Look at it again." He looked. The room held its breath, and the claim was approved right there, retroactive in full. Danny Ramos put his face in his hands and shook, and the widow grabbed Diane and would not let go, and the 3 teammates stood tall along the wall the way they had along 100 walls, and Marcus watched his mother steady a grown man's shoulders and say, "See, told you. Go through together." It was the whole thing right there, everything she was, and he'd almost gone his whole life never seeing it. Afterward, they stood in the parking lot in the morning sun. Cortez, Vega, and Souk said their goodbyes to their master chief the way soldiers do, short and hard and full of everything they'd never say out loud. Cortez gripped Marcus by the shoulder on her way past, hard enough to mean it. "Take care of her," she said. "She'll never ask you to, that's why you have to." Souk was the last. She took Diane's hands. "You still go first," she said. Diane just nodded. Then the 3 of them got into their trucks and drove back to their own quiet lives, and the ordinary world closed over them again like water. Marcus stood next to his mother and didn't know where to start. "Mom," his voice cracked, "I didn't know any of it. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Diane looked out at the water past the parking lot for a while before she answered. "Because it isn't a story, Marcus, it's people, and you don't spend the ones you carried on making yourself look big at dinner." She turned to him. "You wanted me to prove I was tough. I've never once needed to prove that. The trick isn't hitting people. Any fool with a belt can hit people. The trick is being the one who stays. Being the one who goes through the door first so nobody has to go alone. That's the whole job. That's the only thing worth being good at." Marcus thought about the mat, about slipping his punches like she'd read his mind, about the pin and the calm in her face, and how none of it had been about winning at all. She could have hurt him easily. She never even tried. She'd just shown him gently, in front of the people he wanted to impress, that he did not know the first thing about what strength was for. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it all the way down. "I called you. I know what you called me." She put her hand on the back of his neck, the same hand that had steadied frozen soldiers on the worst thresholds of their lives. "It's already gone. Come on. Ranger's in the truck and he hates being left." They drove back to the dojo together, and the next morning at 5 o'clock, Diane Corliss opened the doors like she always did. She swept the lot. She wiped down the mats. She refilled the water cooler. Only this time she wasn't alone. Marcus was there beside her with a rag in his hand on his knees, learning the part of the job that had nothing to do with the belt, and the old dog watched them both from the doorway with his chin on his paws. A stranger walking in would have seen just what everyone always saw. 2 people cleaning a small dojo at the end of a gravel road. The lady with the rag and a young man helping his mother. Nothing worth a second look, and that was fine. That was exactly how Diane wanted it, because the ones who needed to know already knew, and the boy who'd once called her soft finally understood what he was looking at. He'd asked her to prove she wasn't soft. In the end, she proved something harder and better. That the strongest person in any room is almost never the loudest, that real power spends itself quietly on other people, and that the hands you fear most are usually the same hands that carry you home. Marcus wrung out his rag, looked over at his mother working beside him, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see a janitor at all. He saw the Master Chief, and he was proud, finally, of exactly the right thing.